Think back to the first real money you ever had. Not pocket change. Actual money, a first paycheck, a bonus, a gift that felt like more than you were used to holding. Now, be honest with yourself. Where did it go? Most people can't fully answer that question. They remember the feeling of having it far more clearly than they remember what it turned into. And that gap between the feeling and the outcome is where almost everything about wealth is decided. Here's what makes this uncomfortable. Two people can receive the exact same $1,000 on the exact same day. 5 years later, one of them has something to show for it and the other doesn't. Not because one earned more, because of what happened in the first 48 hours. Let's talk about what actually happens in those 48 hours. When most people receive unexpected money, something specific fires in the brain. Researchers who study financial decision making describe it as a reward anticipation response. The same circuitry that lights up before eating, before winning, before any expected pleasure. And notice the key word there, before. The brain rewards the anticipation of spending, not the spending itself. This is why the strongest urge to spend hits immediately in the first hours before the money has even settled. Your brain is not calculating, it's celebrating, so the money gets assigned. Sometimes to a thing you'd been waiting for, sometimes to a bill that was already looming. Sometimes it just quietly dissolves into a week of slightly better meals, slightly nicer choices, 100 small yeses you barely register. None of these decisions feel wrong in the moment. That's the important part. There is no single moment where a person says, I am going to waste this. The money leaves through 1,000 reasonable doors. Now, here's the part that reframes everything. Study after study of people who build wealth reveals something almost boring. Their first meaningful money didn't go toward a purchase at all. It went towards something with a completely different function. They bought time, or they bought optionality, or they bought the removal of a problem that was costing them money every single month. Paying off the debt that was quietly bleeding interest. Buying the tool that let them earn more per hour. Setting aside the buffer that meant the next emergency wouldn't force a desperate decision. None of that feels good in the moment. That's exactly why most people don't do it. There's no dopamine in paying down a balance. No reward circuit fires when you move money into savings. It feels like nothing. And this is the actual divide. Not discipline, not intelligence, not even income. It's whether a person can tolerate a decision that feels like nothing today in exchange for something real later. Think about how that plays out over years. The first person's $1,000 produced a weekend, a purchase, a memory, real value, genuinely, but finite. It ended when it ended. The second person's $1,000 removed a monthly cost, or created capacity, or bought a small amount of freedom, and that kept working. Quietly, every month, long after the decision itself was forgotten. $1,000 became an event. The other became a system. Now, before this starts to sound like judgment, let's be precise about something. If you spent your first real money and have nothing to show for it, that does not make you financially irresponsible. It makes you human, running default settings that almost everyone runs. Nobody teaches this. School doesn't teach it. Most families don't teach it because most families never learned it either. You inherited a set of instincts built for scarcity and immediacy, and then you were handed money and expected to somehow know better. You didn't have the information. That's not a character flaw, that's a gap. And gaps can be closed. So here's what closing it actually looks like. And it's smaller than you'd expect. The next time money arrives that you weren't already counting on, do one thing before anything else. Wait. Not a week, not a month, 72 hours. That's it. That's the entire intervention. Because the reward response that fires when money arrives has a half-life. It fades. And what feels absolutely necessary on day one very often feels optional by day three. Not always. Sometimes you still want the thing, and that's fine. But now you're choosing it instead of being pulled toward it. 72 hours doesn't make you disciplined. It makes you present. It moves the decision from the part of your brain that celebrates to the part of your brain that plans. And then ask one question with whatever remains. Does this end when I spend it, or does it keep working? Not every dollar has to keep working. That would be a joyless way to live. But if none of them ever do, the pattern repeats no matter how much comes in. Here's the thing, nobody tells you about that first $1,000. It was never really about the $1,000. It was practice. It was the first time your brain ran a program it would run again with 10,000 and again with 100,000. The same program, just scaled up, which means the amount was never the point. The pattern was. And a pattern noticed is a pattern that can change. You don't need more money to start practicing this. You need the next unexpected amount, whatever the size, and 72 hours of patience. That's where it starts. If this made you rethink where your money actually goes, subscribe to Mind and Money. Because next time, we're breaking down the 5 money beliefs you inherited from your parents without ever agreeing to them.